Hello, I've made a few videos about Hyundai's newest electric model, the KONA Electric, which has about double the range, at least, of our older IONIQ Electric. It's very difficult to get to see one, to get in one, and to test drive one. I was recently on a work trip to Oslo, Norway, a kind of very short dap over to do some things, and I thought I'd wander off, see if I could find a Hyundai garage, and see if I could get in or to drive a KONA Electric. So I didn't manage to drive it. This was my fault more than the dealers. I'll come back to that. So what do I think of it, and how does it compare to our IONIQ Electric? Let's have a quick look at that in this video. Electrical efficiency. Zero tailpipe. I appeared kind of out of the blue, or more accurately out of the fog, at a Hyundai dealer just east of the centre of Oslo. And I noticed, I was walking off from the train, that they had a KONA. I could see it through the window. So I went in to see if I could have a look and ask if I could have a test drive. The staff at the Hyundai garage were very kind. I just turned up out of nowhere and I explained that I drove a IONIQ Electric in the UK and was interested in the KONA, but it's very difficult to get, any sight or sound of a Hyundai KONA Electric in the UK. So the dealer there confirmed that, he'd had a lot of people popping in to try and see it during their travels from various other places, Sweden, Denmark. If I'd given them more notice, they would have been able to get me in a test drive of one as well. So maybe next time I go, I'll try and do that, if I haven't been able to get access to one in the UK. The car was booked up all day for test drives, and the dealer indicated there was something like 7,000, I may have the numbers wrong, 7,000 pre-orders and a waiting list of about 2 years in the kind of Northern European markets for the KONA Electric. Shape. So let's just compare from outside, from the showroom footage and then from my drive footage, the KONA to the IONIQ Electric. So the KONA is a smaller car, and it has a much more sort of truncated boot or trunk area, whereas the IONIQ is this kind of, wedge-shaped, longer, more closer to a kind of, lift-back sedan type shape. This has implications then for the boot. So when I was actually there in the dealer, the boot on the KONA, in spite of, again, apologies for the kind of dark footage here, it looked a reasonable size, and I think for us the main thing is whether we could get our children's pushchair, their stroller in there. I think we could, but then coming back and looking at my own boot, and then it's got this, of course, this weird sort of retractable cover here. The boot is bigger. I'm sure you can look up the measurements and see exactly how much bigger, but subjectively it's definitely a bigger boot in our IONIQ, and we can fit not just the pushchair in there, but other things too. But the sort of the boot, the trunk lids thing is very similar. In terms of rear seating then, again for us, it's important, can we get our children in there and sort of occasional adult passengers. So again, in the showroom, the rear space looked fairly good in the KONA. Reasonable knee room and reasonable kind of headroom and general kind of passenger space in the back there. Coming home and then looking at our IONIQ, again, it was a kind of brighter day, not in a dark showroom here, so don't read too much into the kind of footage of it. But in the KONA, I definitely had less knee room. I could sit there, but then coming back and comparing the sort of similar shot, apologies for the wobbles, in the IONIQ, you can see I have a kind of reasonable amount of space in front of my knees here in IONIQ, whereas in the KONA my knees are pretty much touching the seat in front. Again, I'm not sure how it's adjusted, so it's a bit of a subjective comparison. And our IONIQ, of course, has the air vents for rear passengers, which if you look then in the KONA, it doesn't have that. I know it's a smaller shape, but they could have done that, I'm sure. Then comparing the KONA and the IONIQ sort of front area of the car, they feel very similar to get in, very familiar. There's an IONIQ in the background here in the Hyundai dealer in Oslo. So it's similar feel, similar kind of feel of space. Everything feels a bit closer to you in the KONA because of that raised center console, but it feels generally the same. So you'll see getting into our IONIQ here, similar kind of feel, similar kind of look, very sort of house style of Hyundai here. It feels sort of a bit more open because of that center console, but there's very little between the two of them. In the KONA, of course, the GPS or the sat-nav system is high up, whether it's sort of lower down in the IONIQ, but you still have the regen paddles and very similar switchgear around the sort of seating area. The gear selector buttons are a different style, but they're pretty much identical in terms of functionality. So you'll see now, here we are in my IONIQ. You see the wheel is identical in terms of the feel of it. It's got the regen paddles to increase on the left and decrease regen on the right. But of course this, the gear buttons are different, but it's a similar kind of logic, sort of electronic drive-by-wire. I like the fact that the KONA had this kind of lid for the wireless charging pad for your phone and access to the USB and so on. The switchgear is in slightly different positions, but is very similar for the heated and ventilated seats. And just like my IONIQ, the KONA has a kind of reasonable little storage console there. In terms of the space under this raised center console in the KONA, there's a reasonable amount of space down there and access to the kind of auxiliary power sockets and so on. In the IONIQ, it's easier to get at the space, but actually I think the space when you touch it is possibly smaller, because in the KONA it then goes under the kind of gear selector things as well. It's kind of, I checked it whether my knee would bump into it, and I think with the kind of shape of me, I'm about sort of 1.80 meters, something like that, my knee wouldn't bump that much. And of course in the IONIQ it's not possible to bump at all, because there's no raised center console there at all. With the KONA then, in terms of the visibility from the front looking out the back, it's pretty good. The C-pillars are pretty thick, but I think the visibility is going to be fairly good. It's a smaller kind of rear windscreen, but of course the IONIQ is very different in the design because we have this split rear windscreen, and one of the biggest differences. But if you'll notice, the C-pillars are pretty much, as thick there, so I think visibility is going to be reasonably equivalent. The front of the KONA, this is looking from the back at the front. Very nice place to be, clearly quite sort of designed around the driver. The IONIQ similarly is, you'll see the look and feel is very kind of similar here, and I think they're both places, nice places to be as a driver. Thinking about, noise first really, the thing about the back of the KONA is it has this more fixed parcel shelf and a kind of smaller space behind the rear seats, whereas in our IONIQ it has this kind of very thin retractable parcel shelf, if you can call it that. And I do notice that sort of seems to generate or let through quite a lot of road and tyre noise. So perhaps that would be better in the KONA. The one trade-off, I guess, is that you'll see here the shape of the KONA is not the kind of, elongated wedge of the IONIQ. The back is quite sharp down in spite of that little sort of spoiler over the rear screen. So, I'm not sure in terms of the wind noise from that and the efficiency of the aerodynamics. It might be worse than our IONIQ. So we're looking now at the IONIQ. Similar kind of design, but far more kind of sloped, smoother aerodynamics on the back of the IONIQ there. So yeah, being back in Oslo again, it's like being in a science fiction film to some degree. So just walking around without much effort at all, you just see electric cars absolutely everywhere, and they're typically following each other like these, two i3s going in convoy. One thing I really noticed this time, because I wandered off a little bit more than previous trips, was that there were charging stations in a petrol station. So I think there's one or two of those now in the UK have come in. There was an IONIQ charging, the one there. But then, there's workplace charging, and here there's a whole street of, I think, quite sort of low-level electric charging for cars. And this is by no means an exception. There's electric car charging infrastructure everywhere. I don't live in Norway, so I won't be able to say how adequate it is to the kind of needs people have, but it seems to cover, the scale of really wide-scale adoption of electric cars, which is really good to see. And then coming back to the UK, it feels like something's gone wrong with your brain. All of a sudden, me driving back from the airport in my IONIQ Electric, and you don't see any other electric cars. I didn't on my drive back. And then, in Norway, they're just everywhere. So that's just really interesting to see. So thanks for watching this short comparison of the KONA Electric to the IONIQ Electric, just from my limited experience of sitting in one. I really hope to get a test drive of one soon. Any dealers that want to contact me, please feel free to do that. I'm going to sort of reach out to some dealers as well, especially as the first service is coming up on my IONIQ Electric now. So I'd like to combine maybe getting the service done and a test drive, if that's possible somewhere. If I do manage to do that, I'll come back with another video about actually driving it. Sitting in it was very nice. It's a very nice feel in the car, good visibility, good functions, that kind of thing. So also, it's the same platform, I think, the KONA, as the Kia Niro EV, which might be coming to the UK end of this year, next year, I don't know. So it's good to see these much longer range electric cars coming now. Still a bit concerned about the price, being sort of at or above the £30,000 kind of level. But it's nice to see them coming, much cheaper than a Tesla for that kind of range. And I really, really look forward to trying to get a test drive in one of these cars and, testing out the range, seeing the efficiency, seeing how that compares to the IONIQ and so on. Time will tell how long that will actually take to set up. So thanks for sticking with me, and subscribe if you do want to see more videos, and bye for now.